A very warm welcome to this Rayworth's Harrogate Literature Festival, part of the Harrogate International Festivals. And we are, and I keep saying this during these events, but so grateful to Rayworth's LLP solicitors. They're a local Harrogate family. They've been supporting the festival, sponsoring the festival for so long. And this year, more than any other, we are particularly lucky to have them. I'd also just like to say, because these events are all free, if you feel generous, and I know these are challenging times, but if you're able to contribute anything towards the festival, then you can go and donate on the website. My name is Matt Stadlen. I'm a presenter, a producer, and a writer. I even take photographs of birds, and you can probably see my strategically positioned book just there over my right shoulder. I am so excited and thrilled to introduce to you a man who's become a friend, I suppose, over the years. I've interviewed him so many times. It's always a pleasure, always a treat. Rory Bremner, welcome.
Hello, Matt. How are you? I love your bird thing and your bird book, which was wonderful. I mean, you keep sort of finding these new strings to your bow, and it makes the rest of us feel just so completely lazy. And I think, what did you do during lockdown? Well, I went for a walk, and Matt, you just interviewed, everyone from the Dalai Lama to, I don't know, Stephen Hawking, and that was amazing posthumously. But you just do all these things. So anyway, it's good to see you again.
It's very good to see you, Rory, even in these straitened times. It's the second time actually that I've had this little insight into one of your lovely rooms. Very atmospheric.
This is the teal room. This was supposed to be a place where we could sort of just throw the children to have teenagers, and this is kind of their room, but I invade it to do these. But it's a shame we can't be in Harrogate. I love Harrogate. It's one of my favourite places. I actually had an aunt, my auntie Barbara, who used to live in Spofforth, which people from Harrogate will know. It's not far. They got these lovely names like Spofforth and Follyfoot, and so Spofforth isn't far away. And that's where I remember, during childhood, those wonderful evenings when you're put to bed, ages of 7 or 8, and it's still light outside in the summer. That amazing. And there was a fish and chip van, and they do fish and chips, as you well know, very, very well in Yorkshire. And it was sort of turn, and you could smell the fish and chips and hear people chattering in the street outside, and it was still late, and loved all that. So occasionally, if I'm in Harrogate, I kind of make a little detour, and of course Betty's. Betty's wonderful tea rooms. I did go in there once a few years ago, and I needed to do an email, so I asked if they got an internet, what their Wi-Fi was, and they looked so affronted that I would have actually been quite upset if they had got if they had got a Wi-Fi code, because it seems so sort of un-Betty's, isn't it? It's long as it's like sort of Alan Bennett here at Betty's.thetearooms.uk. There's something rather strange about it all, but anyway, they maybe have a Wi-Fi connection now. But it's just a lovely, lovely town, and I love the Hotel de Vaux and the running park nearby. And we used to do Yorkshire Business Festival there as well, which Bill Clinton, I think he addressed one year, and he surprised a couple who were playing. He was playing golf, and they were getting married. And they played the risky thing of introducing the bride to Bill Clinton. And I think another 5 minutes, and we could have cancelled the wedding. But also, what's extraordinary, and it was a funny business conference at the conference centre that just a little bit outside of town, and the organizer he was just very kind of politically incorrect. He introduced Elle Macpherson once. He said, "I've got a great guest." He said, "The next speaker," is Elle Macpherson. He said, and I said, "What do you mean? You mean the model and the lingerie design?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Oh right, what's she going to talk about?" He said, "Who cares?" And that's how he introduced her. He said, I said, "I've got Elle Macpherson." They said, "What's she going to talk about?" And I said, "Who cares? Ladies and gentlemen, Elle Macpherson." And on she came, and she was brilliant.
I once asked Elle Macpherson out during an interview I did with her, yeah.
Did you? Did you get anywhere?
Well, she said, I think she said something like, it's still on the internet somewhere, a BBC 5 minutes with interview with Elle Macpherson. I think she said something like, well, suggest a possible venue and or an activity, and I went for bird watching and cricket, and they didn't go down well.
Oh right, okay. Well, I suppose you should have said sauna and I don't know, Harrogate.
I think the sauna might have put her off even more than the bird watching. Anyway, it's going to be very challenging for me, this, Rory, because we're both in shock throughout, and my cheekbones are already hurting from smiling or laughing at what you're saying. You said that about Betty's. Everyone talks about Betty's, and of course Harrogate is flush, but of all sorts of different lovely tea rooms. I mean, isn't it famous for its tea rooms?
It is lovely. Well, I do a lot of writing, and I love sort of people watching in cafes and bars, mostly cafes, and it's terrible because you end up sort of drinking a lot of lattes and cappuccinos and all that sort of stuff. But actually, I kind of just like a little bit of buzz around me when I'm thinking and writing. When I'm on tour, I like to sort of get to places early, sort of like 2:00 in the afternoon, and then spend a couple of hours there, just maybe googling a little bit about the local town. Mark Steele does this really, really well. Mark Steele does a little stand-up radio fool, and he does a wonderful show, a great show called Mark Steele's in Town. And he will perform like at the Harrogate Theatre, but the whole show will be about Harrogate, and he will have researched it and put jokes in. And so I always kind of like, wherever I am, like to try and find out a little bit about the town. And even if you're doing it as Trump saying, I remember I came here, Harrogate, in fact I started out here. And Betty was a very good friend of mine. I knew Betty very well, and I said you should start a tea rooms. So it was my idea. So that's what it was. And you go to places like Cirencester. I live near Cirencester. And for Donald Trump, that's great because Cirencester, because of course the Romans, and they came here, and I wondered why, and I realized they got a great Waitrose, they got a fantastic Waitrose, and it was Nero, I think, was my favorite emperor, and I got him into coffee. I said you should open some coffee shops, and so Cafe Nero, it's all down to me. So to have a town with that many cafes as Harrogate has, it's just I just sit, write, think about what's going on in the town, find out what people are talking about. Have they closed down a road, or is there a roundabout they're all complaining about? Or and it's those first few minutes with an audience of just sort of breaking the ice. And also, I mean, it's the same thing with corporates. We did a lot of corporate conferences, and you need to find out a little bit about the company, what they do. And I always say, so okay, what do they talk about in the bar? What are the subjects that they're talking about? So that you can have you can engage with the audience in that way. So yeah, that's what I do. But Harrogate is rich in its tea bars and coffee rooms.
It begs all sorts of questions, your answer, and I'm going to ask lots of them. But you're dodging the sun, Rory. So I wonder whether we should plunge you into greater darkness and ask you to shut the blind.
Okay, I will, but I'll do this. Okay, here we go. We're going to go into darkness. There we are. It's unbelievable. You've got October sun. What was it?
This is what's known as...
It was... what was his name? How's that? Is that any better?
That's perfect.
It's still got a strange, so that's a rather weird look. We're going to tune in halfway through and say, where is he? What's it? There we go. October Sun. It's a bit like John Betjeman, wasn't it? It was burnished, was it Joan Hunter Dunn, burnished and furnished by Camberley Sun.
Betjeman makes me think of Brecht, just because they're two great literary figures. Exactly. We begin with me, and we can talk about Brecht a little later. We can talk about translation. We can talk about opera. There's so many things to talk about. But first of all, since we are in Yorkshire, well, sort of virtually in Yorkshire,
yep.
How does the Yorkshire accent develop? Can you tell the difference between different dialects within Yorkshire? It's such a big county, this county.
Well, absolutely. There is a program to be done about all the accents in Britain. There's so many different ones, and I kind of wonder if there's connections. For example, the Geordie accent, it's a little bit like that, and get people talking away and the coal mines and all that sort of stuff. But it's not a million miles away from Welsh, and it's a little bit of there's a musicality, and I wonder if there was a coal mine connection between, if there were people who sort of worked in the coal mines in Wales and worked in the coal mines in the northeast, and there was a kind of a connection. But with Yorkshire, I was thinking of Geoffrey Boycott, well, there we go, and it's all of it, it's kind of. Like wide open vowel sounds and all this, and then you go a little bit further to the to the west, and you get into Lancashire, and it gets a little bit more nasal there, and it all sort of all kicks off by the time you get to Manchester, and then you go a little bit further, you get to Liverpool, and for some reason it changes again. Don't know why, and it's got that kind of musicality, and it's really great. And you think that's three totally different accents on just one motorway, the M62, and it's amazing. And then you go back and you get to Manchester again, and you think, actually, I'm going to go further. I'm going to end up in Yorkshire, and you go all the way back the same way. And that's the beauty of English accents, Matt.
I've never heard you do London accent. I mean, I don't even know how you describe your accent.
Well, my accent, it's really bad. That was a Scottish slipped out very unusually. Well, I was born in Edinburgh. It was a kind of middle-class background, and I was kind of, I wish I had this sort of lovely sort of Scottish burr, really. That's because actually something very nice about a very gentle Scottish accent. There's all sorts of, something like the guy who played the detective in Bodyguard, or Sean Connery, of course, because he used to deliver milk. He used to work in the Fountain Bridge. I was going to say brewery, but where's milk made? In the anyway, Fountain Bridge. I think he worked for the brewery and
in the dairy. In the
dairy. That's right, Fountain Bridge Dairy, and so that part of Edinburgh. So because Sean Connery, a wonderfully sexy accent, isn't he? James Bond. But sort of going around saying the name's Bremner, Rory Bremner. And I met him actually once. I played golf with him, and he loves his golf. He's obsessed with golf. So you try and have a conversation about anything else, and he'll bring it back to golf. He'll say, who was the best director you ever worked with? And he'll say, Brian De Palma. No, the green slopes away to the right here, so you've got to try and just get beyond the bunker and land on the left. He loves his greens, loves his golf, and it was a rather bizarre evening. There was a friend of mine who was going out with a sort of famous presenter, and they just split up, and he was really upset. And Sean Connery said, "Show me a photograph." So he showed this slightly tear-stained photograph of a well-known television presenter who had just broken up with. And Sean Connery looks at the photograph and says, "You dodged a bullet," and passed it back. And he went back to England, this lad, and he started going out with her again. And people say, "But no, James Bond told you dodged a bullet." So I'm very sorry. I think you get to this stage now when you meet people that you imitate. They all become sort of anecdotes, really, in some ways. And I mean, David Frost, who got me started, really, as much as anything. Well, I mean, I was obviously started on the cabaret circuit, and I'd been working early shows at the BBC, but I loved doing those David Frost programs on Sunday mornings. And he was always very kind. And as he got older, and his voice kind of changed from being, hello, good evening, and welcome, and all that tremendous energy, to being slightly slower and a little bit more slurred. And he would, at the end, he would say, do people's voices change as they get older? And I'm sure what he meant was, do I really sound like that? And you have to say, well, yes, you do. So after he died, they brought out a book, and his family wanted it to be an audio book as well. So they got me in to be David in the book, which was a great honor, really. And it's lovely to do something like that for the whole family, because they're a terrific family. And Wilfred, his son, who's doing a great job in New York now as an anchor, and I think it's on CNBC, and he's making his way sort of in his father's footsteps, but really good in his own right. So, I have tremendous fond memories of David Frost. He was unlike anybody else. He brought people together, and my goodness, I mean, you need that in these times. I mean, he was capable of having a kind of extraordinary summer garden party, and you'd have I don't know, Bob Geldof would be talking to Esther Ranson, and William Hague would be talking to Alistair Campbell, or people from different ends of the spectrum, and and you kind of that way that that you sort of leave your shoes outside when entering a mosque. You would leave any animus outside, and it would just, you'd be in a sort of safe zone where people can meet and talk. And I think particularly now it's really striking how polarized we are at the moment on just about any issue, and how politicized any issue becomes. If you something like lockdown, or it divides opinion, and you find occasionally, if you foray into the Telegraph, because I'm following news stories, and you suddenly see there's an Alison Pearson piece or a Sherelle Jacobs piece, and they're very, very, very angry about lockdown, and other people are very, very frightened about coronavirus, but there seems to be no common ground. And I love common ground, and I want to bring people together. It was the similar thing with Brexit. Where I think we're almost becoming a bit of a donut, where we're pushed towards the outside, towards the extremes. And this is a feature of social media, where the algorithms behind social media, with its Facebook or Twitter, they're based around fear and anger, because that's how you get the retweets. And so it encourages silos. It encourages to just live in your own little world, but it encourages anger, and so we get this kind of diversion of opinion. And the center ground, where it's possible to hold two views, like maybe it's possible to support trans rights and women's rights at the same time. That should be possible, but it's impossible. It seems you have to choose. You have to choose: are you in or out? Are you trans or women? Are you Democrat or Republican? And that really worries me and disturbs me at the moment.
Help me understand how satire fits into this, because it's very interesting to hear you say that you want to bring people together, and social media can provide a platform for satire, but the satire can often be quite vicious. So how do you locate the sort of satire that you do? Because you're far more than, I was going to say, just an impressionist. I mean, your impressions are brilliant. How do you bring a bit more than the impressions?
Well,
by giving satire, which is what you do, but at the same time not polarized, because if you send someone up, that doesn't have to be an aggressive or not, does it?
No, it doesn't, and it didn't seem to be in the past. And in the past, it was like we had a license. It was like, people talk about in Shakespearean times the licensed fool, or that people talk about comic license, and that it was interesting. It was around about the time of the referendum, the Scottish referendum of 2014, and I was doing a few jokes about Alex Salmond or something, and then suddenly these things started to appear on Twitter, on my Twitter feed. From SNP people saying that, look, I voted SNP and you're insulting me by doing impressions of Alex Salmond or whatever. It's never occurred to me in the past that people, they would take it personally, that if you were doing an impression, and that goes all the way up now to more recently Corbyn. If you were to do a sketch about Corbyn, you would get people piling in on the Twitter feed because they're really angry because they felt that you were insulting them personally. And so that and I think it's gone into another level now, where people when it's come this talk recently about left wing and right wing comedians and Tim Davie at the BBC, and it's almost like people they want to own your comedy. They want to have their own comedy. It's like increasingly people are getting their own news channels. We're getting Spectator TV. There was Breitbart, which is TV in America. There's a new one they're launching. I think Byline Times will have a TV station. So we're going to be living at home, working from home, so not associating in an office, choosing the kind of news and the slant of news that we want to watch, following the Twitter feeds and the people that we want to follow. And that's only going to exacerbate, I think, this sense that we've taken up a position. This is who we are, and we're going to lead with our politics or our gender identification or our religion or our ethnicity. And you're going to have to cross that barrier before you can communicate on a human level. I would rather that somebody's sexuality or their religion or their ethnicity or something was about the 8th or 9th thing that I found out about them, and the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd was their sense of humor, their humanity, and sometimes their vulnerability. I mean, I find vulnerability so much more appealing in people with strengths, where you can identify, and this is why I find something like Trump completely abhorrent, because it's all about the front. It's all about about calling people out, about bullying. And I find that very distasteful, very distasteful. I watched the debate the other night, and, I had to watch it literally between my hands, because it was so unpleasant, and the constant interrupting and all this sort of stuff. And it was a brawl, as people said. And I wanted Joe Biden to say, listen, this guy, he doesn't respect the rules of the debate. He's not respecting the moderator. He doesn't respect me as an opponent in a democracy, in an election. He doesn't respect the military. He calls them losers and suckers. He doesn't respect African Americans. He doesn't respect the vote, in fact, the voters, because he's saying, well, we'll have to see what happens. We'll have to see what happens, and then, because we don't know the way the vote's going to go. And I always think about Trump as being, he's like the cat that turns up at Crofts, and people, the doorkeeper says, well, sorry, there's a dog show. He says, so I'm here now, you have to let me in. And as soon as you've got the cat in the dog show calling the shots, then everybody else's behavior has to change, and you think he shouldn't be anywhere near that situation.
Well, I want to ask you precisely about that, actually, because what I noticed in the debate was how difficult it was for Biden to cope in this new world in which Trump seems to have dragged down the tone of public discourse and the way that we interact with each other. So actually Biden can used to anyway, I don't know how well he can look after himself anymore, but used to certainly be able to punch with the best of them.
Yeah.
metaphorically.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's incredibly difficult for someone coming up against someone who is prepared to lie and to say pretty much whatever he wants in order to serve his interests, to cope. And Biden's behaviour wasn't itself that great. And
no, well, you get drawn into it. You get drawn.
Far from draining the swamp, Trump has actually sort of widened the sewers.
It poisons the well. You know, that's the way. And you think in order to take him on, you have to take on that kind of thing. I think it was it Bette Midler or something, weirdly. She tweeted that, you know, Biden had turned up, he was determined to be a gentleman, which is all very well until you were coming up against a cornered alley cat. And clearly that was the way that Trump came out. But, you know, that's my genius. You know, that's what I do. You know, I'm a genius, Matt, as you know. That's what Donald J. Trump, Donald J. Trump, that's what the J stands for, genius. Okay, you have that. But we have tremendous numbers in America now, the corona. Of course, I think we're over 200,000 now. And I think that's more than anyone. So we got to be doing something right. But I find it, and of course, you know, as an impressionist, you're torn because Trump gives you plenty of material, and Biden is a great deal less flamboyant. He's less of a character. So professionally, you think, well, Trump will give you another 4 years of material, but he is the great disrupt. I mean, but you need to think, he's saying, well, you know, I want to celebrate. I had to celebrate my performance. I said, let's get together, all the great guys. Let's get my campaign manager, my lawyer, my foreign policy advisor, my chief of staff, my national security advisor. They said, we can't. I said, why not? They said, because they're all in jail. And you look at the number of people, literally, who have been in his circle, who are either in jail or going to jail or have been pardoned. And it's extraordinary. But of course, you know, there's a wider thing going on here, which is the strongman, the return of the strongman, whether it be in Hungary with Orban, or whether it be in the Philippines with Duterte, or Bolsonaro in Brazil, or Putin in Russia, or Xi in China, who are kind of undermining and dismantling these organizations like the United Nations or the European Union or the World Health Organization that kind of was set up to undo the damage done by the last generation of populist demagogue leaders. And I can understand where it came from. I absolutely can understand. I'm very sad we weren't on air between 2010 and 2015, where you thought of the coalition, you know, David Cameron's coalition. And I think, you know, I thought we were a fairly pucker bunch of chaps. It was me and Nick Clegg. And I think, you know, we got on fairly well. And people said to me, you know, are you going to make the rich richer? Are you going to make the poor poorer? And I think, Matt, we managed to do both. So I think there was a little, you know, I think we should get a little bit of credit for that. And, you know, you sort of think, well, maybe that was kind of benign time. But then you look into what was going on with benefit sanctions and the people who were left behind and the inequality and this feeling that this globalization and free movement of people wasn't working for everybody. And there were people who felt left behind. There were people who were unequal. There were people whose lives were not benefited. And this grew. They were there for the taking when Farage and UKIP and when Brexit came along. And I absolutely get that. And Europe didn't do enough to address it across the board. They didn't do enough to address this growing gap between the European leaders and the politicians and the people. And it left the ground open for demagogues and populists to come in and say, all of the problems that you face, they are down to the fact that we are in the European Union. And it was a very ready audience. And again, we started at the beginning about talking about bringing people together. And we are in a time now where it is fashionable to stoke up division. And, you know, do you ever think it was going to be a hashtag defund the BBC? I mean, you've worked for the BBC. The BBC isn't one person with a political agenda. It's a lot of people. And you would have been trained at the BBC. Is that right? You were trained and worked there?
Kind of trained on the job, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to train. Can I just say, I did a lot of my training on the job. If I concerned, can I just say, by the way, this is a fantastically socially distanced discussion we are having, and I just in case people say that we are in some way off the pace, or they say that I am my eye is not on the ball, or indeed that I am in some way absent without leave. But I would say no. I would say that in every aspect of this crisis, I've been all over the place. I mean, all over, whether on track and trace, or on care homes, or on PPE, or on school exams, or on quarantine, or on lockdown. We have literally been all over the place. So, and Matt, are you a father? Are you a father?
Not yet, sadly.
No. Well, if you've been a father as long as I have, and indeed as often as I have, because I'm now a father of. Hang on, how many is it? I think I've got a personal R of, I think it's 6.4. So, but it may be more. It may be more, Matt. So if there's anyone out there, indeed in Harrogate, indeed if there's anyone there with whom I came to contact, and there may be a possibility of some offspring, there, get a test, and we will find you. Yes. So I went off the boil there about we're talking about division. That's right.
Yeah, but I've got a question to jump in quickly before we entirely leave America and Trump behind. Maybe we'll come back to them later. But you spent quite a bit of time, obviously, really closely watching and observing people, not just how they speak and not just what comes out of their mouth, and that's where the satire comes in, which is part of what makes your act, I think, so brilliant. But you also watch their mannerisms, as we've just seen there with Boris. And sometimes, I mean, obviously with makeup, and the makeup in the shows you did with Bremner Bird Fortune was genius, but even without makeup, you can make us believe almost that you are that person by the way you look, the way you act. Have you noticed with Trump that he has this sort of evil genius capacity, both to be a bully, to really slug his opponent or whoever he's targeting, but at the same time, he can then also do this sort of puppy dog face where he sort of sits there, listening. If someone says something nasty to him or challenging him, he's sort of able to look like he's the puppy dog in the corner. And I imagine for some people, that's almost convincing, if not convincing.
I'm the victim. Hey, you can see it with all it's in a lot of hand gestures, aren't there? There's sort of, and he says, and I know this, and you know a lot. Teresa's, and a lot of them moving around like this. Actually, the body language is very interesting, and the sort of the alpha male, the non-smiling smile, and people have written sort of whole books about this and articles you can sort of Google about his manner, his demeanor. And there's something I used to do. You're very kind about looking like the characters, but I think I have a very bland face.
Not true. As I've always said, Rory, you're a very handsome man.
Stop! No, stop! Now stop your flirting. But he, so I've got it sort of quite bland at this face, so it kind of people can read things, and if you're doing William Hague or something, you can start to look a little bit like that. But in terms of the body language, I did once got a body coach from the National Theatre to teach me to walk like Bill Clinton, or indeed to walk like John Major. That's how long ago it was, and I loved studying that, and it was a great. I was thinking, I'm fascinated by Desmond Swayne. Have you come across Sir Desmond Swayne? And he is this extraordinary. I think he's the kind of Jonathan Miller would sort of call him a popinjay, a besooted aubergine. He's this extraordinary, and he dresses the House of Commons like somebody dressed in a bathrobe, or one of those people who, in the gym or at the squash club or something, will insist on talking to you still stark naked with no attempt to sort of cover themselves with a towel or whatever. And so body language is fascinating. And I mean, I was lucky when we did Bremner Bird Fortune. We had a terrific makeup department and costume department, and it helped. We had an extraordinary sort of work ethic, and I missed doing those shows. I missed them so much. Where literally, Jeff and I would meet on a Monday. Jeff Atkinson, my producer, and we'd literally in 2 hours on a Monday morning, we'd map out. Right, we needed to get 6 or 7, maybe 8 characters in the week that we could do, because that's as many people as we could do because each person would take about an hour and a half in makeup. So we'd say, okay, we're going to do Prince Charles this week. We need to do Tony Blair this week. I think it'd be a good idea if you did Sven-Göran Eriksson this week. We're going to do an Ian McGaskill sketch, weather sketch or this other. And the team would be waiting next door, waiting for their instructions for the week, sort of munching their way through piles of croissants And then Jeff would go and say, right, okay, we need to have an office room for Tony Blair. We need to have a sort of large staircase for the White House. And these locations, most of them, you find them in one big stately home on sort of the edge of the M25, which would be our location for the Wednesday. So we'd have to write the whole show on Monday and Tuesday. We'd film it on location on Wednesday, do four characters on Wednesday, and on Thursday we'd move into a studio in Hammersmith, just or Chiswick way, and do a couple of characters in a studio with a green screen, so in front of a weather map, say, or I'd be interviewed by somebody like Jon Snow or Kirsty Young or Kirsty Walk or something, or Krishnan Gurunmurthy, who'd agree to come in and interview me as let's say William Hague or Gordon Brown or something. And then I would just crash out Thursday afternoon and turn up at the studios on Friday and write the monologues with the two Johns. And we'd film it on a Friday evening. It would be edited overnight and go out on Saturday. And we were so happy doing that program, but every part of it, and the makeup, which was our way into this, was so that when I was in the studio, I'd always have a big screen in front of me so I could see what I was doing. And all I would see on that screen, I would see, if, for example, I was dressed up as Keith Floyd. You know, Keith Floyd, a tremendous chef, Matt, you probably remember. There's always a little bit. So we're going to have a little drink. You've got a little drink over here. And that's for me. Then you take the bottle and say, oh, that's for me as well. So we would... but I would be in his set looking like him, and the voice was kind of the last thing that I sort of added on, and it really helped to see myself in context, because it was a real externalization of what happens inside the mind of an impressionist. Because what happens inside the mind of an impressionist is that you are seeing in your mind's eye, you're seeing what somebody looks like as they're performing a speech or as they're in a room or having a discussion. You have that image in your head, and you are just providing a soundtrack to that film, if you like. And so literally when you had the TV screen and monitor in front of me as I was performing my sketches, I would be literally seeing myself, but lost completely. You just see the character in the set you'd expect them to be in. And it made it so much easier in a way. The voice was kind of the icing on the cake. Although, as you know, for an impressionist, really, the voice is where it has to start, because it's over. But it's interesting when you come to something like David Blunkett, for example. If I were to talk to you as David Blunkett, just looking at you now, it doesn't work, because the David Blunkett, because he has that thing, he has his eyes up like that. So you'd have to do it like that to be authentic. To look like the character. That's the only reason, to look like the character. And we used to write so last minute that I would have everything on auto cue, because I'd be writing it in the makeup chair and changing it in the makeup chair and rewriting it in the makeup chair. And that would go out, and then we'd have 2 or 3 auto cue monitors around the room, because there wasn't time to learn it all. But of course, if you were doing David Blunkett and trying to look like David Blunkett, your eyes were up looking at the ceiling. You couldn't see the auto cue. So it's weird that I suddenly realized how do you do this sketch when you can't actually see, you can't actually read the auto cue. But that was the thing. But I needed to look like the character, because actually David Blunkett is remarkable. I have a great admiration for him as a man and as a politician.
I've got a question. Well, actually, I've got squillions of questions for you, but I've got a specific question arising from what you've been talking about a little bit, and it is that how do you now? We talked a bit about satire and bringing people together, and how do you draw the line, just personally, because everyone has a different line. But how do you draw the line of what is, as it were, and it's a terrible word, acceptable in comedy or in satire or in the sort of thing you do? And I'll give you a very, very sort of bland example. You were doing the Keith Floyd impression. Yep. And you were doing the thing about the bottle. Now, I thought that was very funny.
Yeah.
Instinctively, I laughed. If we were to end up living in an overly sanitized world, and some people think we already are, then someone out there will say, well, don't make fun of alcoholism because it's not funny. But then we sort of, then comedy just breaks down and ceases to exist. So some people will say, well, the line is drawn when it comes to sort of personal insults and just an obvious nastiness. But for you, what is okay and what isn't, and how much time do you sort of spend considering what's okay and what isn't?
Well, it was Victoria Wood actually who had the perfect formula, really. And funnily enough, I remember doing a show, a corporate show for some company, and it was me and Victoria Wood. So I can remember having a long chat with her at I think it was the Majestic Hotel, one of the lovely big hotels, the other side of the road, as it were. And her take on this, she would say, if it's funny, it's not bad taste, and if it's bad taste, it's not funny. Now, the brilliance of that is that line changes all the time, and it changes because of the context. And context is absolutely everything. It's where you are at a particular time, because it's the easiest thing in the world to take a joke out of context, and stick it on the front page of a newspaper and sort of say, look at this, what somebody said. But they might have been in a room with an audience. They might have been, because what you don't get, it's like with texts actually. Maybe that's one of the reasons with texts and things, you can't see somebody, you can't hear their tone of voice, you lose all the nuance, you just read what you see. And the similar thing is if a joke is just put on the front page of a newspaper out of context. So that's,
you impose in a way perhaps what you want to, or what you think is there. You fill in a space that you wouldn't be able to if you heard tone of voice or saw the facial expression.
Well, yeah, as I was saying earlier on, I mean, you would colour it with your own political perspective. I mean, I know there is as you know, being well read as you are, there's a literary thing about, no two people will read a book the same way. You bring your own personality, but increasingly, as I said at the very beginning, people are bringing their politics to comedy, and they're judging your comedy against their politics. And once you start to, there's the other thing is you have to. Maybe it's like respect. People say you have to earn it, but I think there's a certain license with comedians. Like when Frankie Boyle does his stuff, I think Frankie Boyle, he's a really good comedian. But Sarah Vine and people will take his stuff out of context, and they'll say, I don't think it's funny to say that Priti Patel is the kind of woman that can orgasm at the thought of a slow puncture at sea. Now, I know what Frankie's doing with that, and the whole fact that it is a very how would you say, it's a shocking image. It's a shocking image, but that's what he's working. That's what he's playing with. And Frankie Boyle is not suggesting. He's not the person who's going out there sort of sticking a hole in the side of a rubber dinghy or something. He is putting in an exaggerated comic way. I mean, it's even boring sort of explaining it. You either get it or you don't. And if you don't get it, then Frankie's not your kind of comedian. But to sort of say, right, I'm going to ban him because I don't like his politics. I think this is a space worth defending, and it's something. The best example, John Cleese, with the Major in Fawlty Towers, and that is a well-known thing where the Major is talking about. I don't know if I can say it in this context, of course, because it could be taken out of context.
Well, yeah, maybe don't say it.
No, I won't. He's talking about So, but it's a Major talk about the distinction between different kinds of black people and where they come from, and the whole point of that is that Cleese is sending up a racist because it's the Major who is. In another rather more innocent example, somebody said, "This is the worst hotel I've ever been to," and the Major goes, "No, I'm not having that." And his next line, he says, "There's a place in Eastbourne." And it's wonderful because you think the Major's going to defend Fawlty and say, how dare you talk about this hotel? But instead, he's saying that is, by implication, Fawlty is the second worst hotel because there's a place that's even worse in Eastbourne. And with the one about race, the whole point is that the Major is disagreeing with somebody, and you think that the Major is going to pick him up and so for racism, and it just turns out that the Major is even more racist because he's got different gradations, and he will call black people from one part of the world one thing and black people from the other part of the world another thing. And the joke is on him. The joke is on him for thinking in some way he's more enlightened because there are different degrees to his racism. And what Cleese was doing there, it was to me, it's you can see that the Major was a figure of fun, and he was ridiculing this extraordinary this sort of fine tuning of racism as if it was acceptable. And you either get it or you don't, but increasingly if you don't get it, the instinct is to want to ban it. And I just think it is something worth defending. And I mean, we're in the context of a literary festival where, this is people like to think about issues, and wouldn't want it to be a sort of a fight to the death argument, but just say, do you consider that by shutting down comedy, by taking it out of context and judging it by its politics, are we losing something? Are we missing something? But I mean,
do you think anything is beyond the pale then?
Well, it's that line I mentioned at the beginning, the Victoria Wood thing. If it's bad taste, it's not funny, and if it's funny, it's not bad taste. And that line will differ between people, and it will differ within people. And I mean, even in some context, I mean, I know a friend who turned up to a bad taste party wearing an Astra. I think it was just after the Challenger disaster, and so he had a sort of smouldering, smoky astronaut suit on. And somebody said, "I think that's really, that's." And he said, "Well, it's a bad taste party. The whole point is, but if you take it literally, of course that's appalling, and it's that's that'll be a text from NASA, but." It was there's a context, and I mean, beforehand I've been questioned by journalists about a line that I've used, and I had to say you do realise that I do stuff ironically, and that if I'm saying something, it very often might be in character.
How do people respond to you, Rory? Because I mean, most people, or a lot of people, like being interviewed because it flatters their ego to some extent. People want to be listened to. People want to be talked to. And I imagine, actually, most people probably want to be satirised or probably want to have impersonations done. Is that your experience?
Well, some of the day, until you do it, and then they sometimes they sort of they often don't recognise themselves in the impression. That's people like Murray Walker. He said Murray Walker. Do you remember the racing? As Clive James said, he always commentates as if his trousers are on fire. And it was all, and there's Michael Schumacher. And I remember him saying, I don't think I sound like that at all. So people don't always recognise themselves. It depends on the individual. I mean, some people take themselves very seriously, and some people can laugh at themselves. And but if somebody, it's difficult if you know that somebody wants you to do them. Well, they Piers Morgan, they had his spitting image puppet on the other day, didn't they? And they revealed his spitting image puppet on Good Morning Britain. And you could see that actually Spitting Image is a satire program, but you could see that he loved the fact that he'd made it onto Spitting Image. It's like, it's like, to paraphrase that song, you're nobody till somebody does you. You're nobody till somebody does you. And clearly he was delighted that he's now important enough to feature on Spitting Image. But there's an argument there, like the masochist and the sadist, where the masochist is saying, oh, please hurt me, please hurt me, please hurt me. And the sadist really should say no, And I think it was Noel Edmonds who asked, why wasn't he done on Spitting Image? And they said, because you're not worth it, or something like that. It might not have been Noel Edmonds. But Michael Heseltine was always asking if you could have his my Spitting Image puppet. He really wanted a copy of his Spitting Image puppet. And I think they refused to give it to him until he resigned and was out of the cabinet. And then they said, oh, we don't need this anymore, you can have it. And that's the way to do it, really, isn't it? Because if you are, from a satirical point of view, if you're kind of in the pocket of the people that you're doing, it doesn't quite have the same bite.
What do you make of the fact that Spitting Image is returning? Because there's been a hole in our satirical landscape. In a way, real life has outdone satire. Who needs satire when we've had years?
Oh, sure. I mean, as I say, if the Martians landed tomorrow and said, take me to your leader, you go, oh, you'd be so embarrassed. You think, look, I'll just take you for a coffee instead. And so Tom Lehrer, who said that satire became obsolete when they gave Henry Kissinger the Nobel Peace Prize in 1974. And that was 40, 50 years ago. And I call it the box set world that we're living in now, that, when Boris Johnson went into hospital and went to intensive care on the 6th of April, it's my birthday, in fact, and and I thought, oh God, who's writing this stuff? This is crazy. This is like the season finale of season 2 of Brexit, or season 2 of a Boris biopic. What do they call it? The Clown. The Clown. Let's call it The Clown. And the series begins with Michael Gove and Boris Johnson the morning after Brexit, realizing that they've won, and they look like those two of the producers, when they were banking on the whole thing being a glorious failure. But they've actually won. They go, what do we do? What do we do now? I don't know. What do we do now? Or as Gove's wife said to him, you're only supposed to blow off the bloody doors, she said. So that was the beginning of this. And then you got the series finale of Boris Johnson in intensive care. And you think, oh, this just doesn't happen. A prime minister in intensive care in the middle of... And then the next series begins and his girlfriend is giving birth in hospital. And you think, this is now, we are in a world beyond the thick of it. We are beyond... And Trump, you couldn't make Trump up, but he does, of course, very famously makes up a lot of stuff. And we got the biggest tax cut in history. Okay, it's the 7th biggest tax cut in history, and all this sort of stuff. So yes, you are against. You've got pretty stern opposition in the real world. So I'd just be really interested to see how it works and how it's received and how it's written actually as well. I mean, I think firstly it's a bit interesting. Like, you love cricket, don't you, Matt? So there's part of you when cricket went to Sky and went, it was no longer free to air, that you felt, oh, it's sad because cricket is part of our culture and to have to subscribe to something to watch it. So I'm sad in a way that its comeback has been as in the vanguard of a new subscription TV channel. Because I'd love us all to be able to see it. Do you know what I mean? If it's part of the national conversation, which Spitting Image was and is, then it would be lovely for us all to see it. Do you know what I mean? So there's that, and also it's what kind of program it is. I mean, you look at the cast of characters, and if we've got St. Piers Morgan and Harry and Meghan and stuff like that, is it going to be a Spitting Image for the celebrity age? Or is it going to be political? Is it going to be hard-hitting? I think probably it'll be both. I know some people who are involved with it. And Matt Ford is one of those, and Luke Kempner. And Luke is smart, bright, lovely guy, great impressionist, brilliant singer. He was in Les Mis, actually, I think, and he's terrific. And Matt Ford is also, I saw his Edinburgh Fringe shows. I got him onto our show in Bremner Bird Fortune in 2015. And he's got a good political brain. He was a former Labour advisor, rather. He was a Labour advisor. He knows his politics. So I think with people like that on board, it will have well-informed, it should have a well-informed political intelligence to it. But I think John Lloyd, who produced, as well as Spitting Image, he produced Blackadder, and he produced QI, and he produced Not the 9 O'Clock News, and he brought an intelligence to it. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how the new one plays out.
And what about more Rory Bremner on our screens?
Well, yeah, I'd love that. Of course I would. And for the reasons that we've spent the last sort of 20 or 30 minutes talking about, I think we are in an absolutely fascinating time at the moment. We have huge, great, big characters, and satire, I think, thrives on grotesques, as indeed does puppetry, because the grotesques, they make the best caricatures, and if you go straight back, back to the earlier times and the satirical cartoons, they would make politicians or kings or the royal family sort of grotesque in their cartoons. So we have those with Trump and Boris. Although my instinct, I think that Trump, I get a feeling Trump's going to win. And I've got a feeling that Boris will be gone within a year and a half. But I think I could be completely wrong about that. So don't keep this and quote it back. But the reason is I think there's something about Trump and his supporters and his core vote and his energy and even the violence, which is why he's kind of stirring it up, plays in his favor, because a lot of middle America and alt-right America, and even I was talking to somebody the other day about African-American women did not like seeing their neighborhoods trashed, and that actually, far from making them side further with the Democrats, actually drove them towards Trump and law and order because they were frightened. So Trump could well put it off. And I think Boris is rapidly using up his lives, rather as a cat might. And I think he's lost with the coronavirus. I think what it's done, it's taken away the energy that used to power up. It's taken away the energy that used to power up the force field of kind of wit and charm. That he could get away with anything, Boris, much as Trump could. He could get away with anything by being sort of being disorganized, or being just being flippant, or being amusing, or just by being a clown, by acting a clown. He could do it. But now the energy that used to go into supply has gone, and all you've got is underneath is the disorganization, is the bombast, is the sort of dishevelled and actually the bully as well. I mean, you saw lashing out at Keir Starmer about 3 weeks ago, saying, when you were supporting the IRA, and you thought, hang on, wait, no, that was Corbyn. You do realise that you do realise there's a different person opposite you do, and I think it was a spasm of muscle memory on the part of Boris. He's so used to that was his go-to insult for the leader of the opposition. He said, "Oh yeah, you're supporting the IRA," and he just reached out, and it was out of his mouth in that sort of slightly ADHD way, out of his mouth, and before he realised that it was Starmer and everyone else in the House was going, what? That he was the former director of public prosecutions. But it was the nasty instinct. It was what you saw in Trump at that debate. It was, I'm going to lash out on this bloke. I'm going to attack this bloke. I'm a disruptor. I'm going to not play by the rules. I'm just going to win. And I think that he's changed in that regard.
I'm just going to quickly jump into and say that were Corbyn here, he would of course say that he didn't support the IRA. And just doing my old BBC hat thing.
Yeah. Well, you see, that's a case in point. You see, because you're instinctively correcting as people who work with the BBC. I mean, there will be people who have a left-wing persuasion. There will be people who have a right-wing persuasion working the BBC. And I remember, as Al Murray said, if you want right-wing comedians, choose a left-wing government. Who are doing stuff about Tony Blair. And I used to get in trouble for doing stuff about Corbyn on my Twitter feed, or on the sketches that I would do, or the live shows that I would do. Although you could make more of a case as people frequently did of Corbyn and his associations, but the fact was that Keir Starmer is not Jeremy Corbyn, and it's fascinating to me. I'm really fascinated that Boris, who, as I've said, for the reasons about sort of is unravelling somewhat, is now in Prime Minister's Questions. He's actually being cross-examined every week by a very highly qualified barrister and QC, and that's fascinating theatre.
I just want to ask you, Rory, because we're running out of time, and I want to, do you, as well as accents or dialects bleeding into each other, is that the same for people? Does David Cameron sort of become Boris Johnson? And what's it like when Prince Charles has a conversation with David Attenborough about climate change?
Well, I don't know. I think when I did David Cameron, I think it was a little bit more like Keith Floyd. You can get to that extreme, you get real. And voices, they do blend. I mean, strangely, if you start off being Tony Blair, all right, and I just think it's important. And I just want to say this. It's all that kind of stuff. And if you add in Chris Tarrant, both these characters, of course, being played well by Michael Sheen, but you've got Tony Blair like that, and you've got Chris Tarrant. Could it be A, Harrogate? Is it B, Leicester? Could it be C? And if you mix that sort of Alan Idle thing and Tony Blair says, you actually get Ed Miliband. And I just think it's very important that that's what I want to say, and as I said on those on that famous headstone, these are my promises, these are my pledges to the British people. I'm never going to let you down. I'm never going to give you up. I'm never going to turn around and desert you. So speaking of voices, your question.
Well, Prince Charles and
yes, extraordinary. Well, I don't know what they'd say. I mean, Prince Charles, it's the first time he talked about how people react. He had his 50th birthday party, 98, I think it was, when Stephen Fry said, could I do a sketch? So I thought, okay, let's do this. I like Stephen Fry, and I actually like Prince Charles as well. He's 30 years ahead of his time with the sort of, Extinction Rebellion. If you bring out, they'll soon will have an Extinction Rebellion marmalade or Extinction Rebellion organic orange juice. So I thought, okay, I'll do Dr. Dolittle. So I wrote this sketch, which was just imagine how it could be if I could talk to the vegetables, learn their languages, give them all the nourishment they need. Imagine moaning to a mushroom, talking to a turnip. I could even talk in Swedish to a Swede. I could converse with the curly kale, rivet the radishes, introduce the mustard to the cress. There's no risk of impropriety with a fellow dwarf variety, because runner beans won't run off to the press. I'd chat in chard, in chicory, and in chervil. They'd never get a moment to themselves. When people ask me how it is I speak leguminous, I say voluminous. How else? No, I think it was asking how it is I speak in broccoli, I say colloquially. How else? So that was great fun. And Attenborough, his voice, I mentioned right at the beginning about David Frost saying, do people's voices change? And David Attenborough's has, because you remember the young Attenborough. Here we find this most extraordinary animal, and now it's got a lot more constrained. It is a little bit older. It has got very sibilant. And I'd love to, the outtakes. I'm obsessed with outtakes of the Blue Planet. Our cameras have now reached the very bottom of the ocean. In hindsight, we should have fastened them more securely to the boat. Or after 3 days filming this extraordinary stick insect, we discover that it is, in fact, a stick. So I love him. And there is part of the impressionist thing, which is playing the national treasures, whether it's Ant and Dec, because of course everybody knows who Ant and Dec are. Well, everybody knows who Dec is. Oh, no, but Ant, come on, we're nothing without each other. Well, yin and yang, that's who we are, yin and yang, that's a great description. Or Strictly, Matt, let me take you. But, you have to be precise and you have to enjoy the characters. He is just, this bundle of energy. But if you notice on Strictly, it's all about, all the Paso Doble, all the African, the American smooth. It's never dance as we do at home. You never get Bruno saying, well, it's perfectly simple, my darling. You have to put your left leg in, you take your left leg out, in, out, and you shake it all about. You do the hokey cokey, but I have to say it was so elegant and precise. I'm going to give you 9 points. National treasures, Matt, like you.
You did Strictly yourself, of course, Rory. Not hugely successfully. Another area, while we're on activities, quickly, sport. I mean, you'd say I love cricket, you love cricket, and you did Geoffrey Boycott earlier, but there was Richie Benno, there were all sorts.
Love Richie Benno, and a great character of mine, and met him once. Brian Johnston set it up. I was doing a view from the boundary, and John said, "Oh no, I gather you do a very good Richie Benno. Come on, let's hear your Bennos. Come on, do Richie Benno." So I started out, and I did a bit of Richie Benno, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around, and there was Richie Benno saying, "Well, that's all very well, but what about the royalties? That's what I want to know." And he was great. Miss him. He had a wonderful sense of humour. My favourite line of his was, so Glenn McGrath out for 1, just 99 runs short of what would have been a remarkable century. And the best, here's the good part of Twitter. I think when Richie Benno died, and the best tweet of all was just somebody who, just 2 words, put a picture of Richie Benno, and they said, "Morning, everyone." And of course, spelling morning, MOURNING, because that was always Richie. He would always begin the commentary at the beginning of the day. It'd be, "Morning, everyone." So, morning, everyone, as indeed we were. Who was the other one you said?
You've done by already. One of my favourites of yours, Rory, someone I've interviewed a few times, even had supper with, John Cleese. And
oh, no.
When you do him.
You're using me like a jukebox now, but the
But you know, the extraordinary thing about John Cleese is now that you get this kind of it is about comedy, isn't it? It's about being able to talk to people, and I kind of like that. Again, his voice has changed. His voice says, it used to be that sort of. Oh, I'm sorry. What? Oh, yes, Major. All that energy, and now it's a lot more laid back. And it's much more expansive. Do you know what I mean? And it's got a kind of light and shade to it, and he's got this light. This wonderful laugh, and he's still one of the great writers. I mean, that Fawlty Towers and his Python stuff, and he's Tim Brooke Taylor was features in John Cleese's book almost every other page because Tim was in so many of those Cambridge sketches, and he was almost like the sixth Python, if you like. And sadly, talking about the times we're in, Tim died at Easter, the Easter weekend of coronavirus. So we lost a great comedy hero there. We just done a tour of I'm Sorry, I Haven't a Clue. And he was just a gem. He was so lovely. He was kind. And, increasingly, the thing about coronavirus is you just hope the politics is going in the opposite direction. It's going in the wrong direction in terms of, we seem to be getting angrier and more divided and more polarized at a time when really, as humans, we should be empathetic and kind and coming together. But I don't know if that ship has temporarily sailed.
Rory, as we crescendo towards the end, I'm going to try and ask you to be hyper-disciplined and answer these questions incredibly briefly, okay? And you'll see with a third of them that it's a great challenge, and that will become clear. But first, talking about the lockdown, how difficult is it to be funny without an audience? I've been laughing away. And one of the challenges I found about doing all these Zoom things is it can be more difficult to build a chemistry with someone. It's still possible, but you're just that little bit more removed, of course, compared to being on stage. But the big absence is the audience. Even if you've got a live Zoom audience, the big absence is the audience on the stage. How important when you are on stage is the atmosphere that you create. It's not just you creating, it's the audience creating it as well. You're able to look at them and watch their reactions and hear their reactions.
It's absolutely essential. And also, more that it's existential. And it's actually, I miss it. I've been trying to avoid the sun, which is why this is a sort of, people get vitamin D, is it, from the sun? And I think comedians get vitamin D from laughter. And we are so used to laughter and to the warmth and the response of an audience that having not had that response for 6 months, I think that we are, I certainly feel emotionally a little bit diminished by it because, I haven't had that wonderful thing that comedians have, and maybe it's one of the reasons why we do it, of, that wonderful feeling that you have when you make somebody laugh and when you make an audience laugh, and you can analyze it. Maybe it's one of those weaknesses of you want people to like you, you want popularity, but you want, as we said earlier, was to bring people together. And so that laughter, I mentioned Tim Brooke Taylor and doing I'm Sorry, I Haven't a Clue. We were in theatres in early February, late January, 2,000 seat theatres, bigger than 2,000 seats, theatres bigger than I normally ever play. But because of Clue, they were big audiences, and the laughter and the feeling that you got and the chatter as people spilled out of the theatre onto the streets afterwards and went home having had a wonderful evening of being in the same room. And that no two shows would ever be the same, of course. Different people would laugh in different places, and it was just, and I really do miss that. And I haven't done a live show since March, just before lockdown. So we're looking 6-7 months now. And I've kind of cheated. The closest I got was a charity thing where they did it on Zoom, but we had about 100 people who were sort of pixelated. There were little icons around the screen, and some of them were, the microphone was up, and so you could hear their response.
And that was, and actually a lot of programs are doing that now, and they have been doing it. And so I think I saw something on television the other day where they were using that exact format of having lots of people in on a Zoom meeting and with the microphones turned up so you could hear an audience. But so I've only done that once or twice, but I haven't tested myself out into the waters of doing sort of 30 minutes, 40 minutes of stand-up. I always do it as an interview because I think that's the only way you can recapture some of the momentum and some of the energy of a live performance, because by the definition of it being conversation, it's two people who are engaged, and there's light and shade, and there's the energy of two people interacting, and that is my substitute. But there can be no substitute for live performance.
Penultimate question.
A tragedy. That's one of many tragedies.
It's very sad. Penultimate question is, in the sort of Rory Bremner jigsaw puzzle, is it's an obvious question, maybe it's slightly banal, but how do you study people? Do you sit there literally with videotape or internet these days and look at them and watch them? Do you listen to them? How visual is it? How audio based? How do you do it? Just briefly. I'm
very, very bad at it. I mean, I used to do it a lot. I would usually do it because I had to. It starts with the voice. It always starts with the voice. You think, I've got to get that quality of the voice. And Keir Starmer would be a very hard one to do. I'm nowhere near that yet. But you hear, it's got that kind of it's that kind. That's where the voice comes from. It's kind of. What we're seeing, Mr. Speaker, is a strange. I don't know if you can hear where it's beginning to come from, and that. But
there's a little bit of Nelson Mandela in there, Rory.
A little bit of Nelson Mandela. But Mandela, you close it down completely. With Keir Starmer, it's kind of, I don't know. It's that's all I know is you just begin to get, as Alistair McGowan, another brilliant impressionist, said, he would look like a dartboard, and he'd say, there are some impressions which he knows are, an inner, and then some which are an outer, and then there's some. But so I think I'm not even sure if I'm on the dartboard at all, Mr. Speaker, with that one. But that's what starts. As I said earlier, sometimes the context helps you, the sort of just literally being able to see yourself. But studying, you've got to kind of listen to people's voices so you can forget what it is they're saying and listen to how they're saying it. I think I dreamt this the other day. I was thinking about how you go with Trump, and it's the speeding up and the slowing down, the light and the shade, and it's all those little ticks, little mannerisms. With Boris, it is the So it is not the little words. It is the pauses, and I will not hesitate to. You're hesitating now. You're hesitating. Oh no, yeah, I know. I'm hesitating. I don't know. So it's all the bits in between. It's character. It's the characterization, isn't it? And cartoonists and caricaturists, spitting image puppets, they exaggerate, don't they? They exaggerate certain characteristics, and that's what we have to do. So impressions, they go through various phases. You start a little bit close to the original because you want people to recognize it, and then when you own the character, they take on a little bit of a life of their own, and that I could perfectly happily exist as Trump for half an hour maybe, and be in character because I feel very comfortable in that skin.
I've seen you before, Rory. I've told you this before as well. At Lord's Cricket Ground, walking up and down, appearing to talk to yourself, presumably.
Oh my God!
Impressions. So, final question. This is unorthodox, and I don't think I've ever done it before.
Oh God! Bye, Matt.
Because we've kind of allowed the conversation to flow and haven't had a real chat, we haven't really done your CV, and by your CV I mean how you got to where you got to. So here's the challenge. I've never asked anyone to do this. Can you do, in about 1.5 minutes, a sort of Wikipedia biography of Rory Bremner, with the sort of bit more of the human bit? So the influence of your dad, or do you want a bit about raised by a pack of lions in Namibia? Do you want that? That would be really essential, but that's not on the Wikipedia bit. So you have 1.5 minutes to tell the Rory story, how you got to where you got to.
Born in Edinburgh, 1961, father, former soldier, working for the Cancer Research Campaign, who sadly died while I was doing my A-levels of cancer, ironically. A mother, very sweet, very Christian woman, taught me to play piano, or rather, she was tone deaf. She just sat there while I did my piano lessons, which gave me my musical ear, which gave me an ability to enjoy voices. By the time I got to school, I had all these sort of irrepressibility and impetuosity and excessive energy that we now identify as ADHD. So therefore I enjoy being the class clown. I started doing impressions at school when I was on my way to school sports trips, because I loved sport. I loved mixing in. I went to prep school outside Edinburgh and to public school at Wellington. And by that stage, by the time I finished, I'd been transformed by a French teacher called Derek Swift, who taught us French, and he taught me Russian as well. He taught us Russian in his spare time, in our spare time. So that sparked a love of languages, which continued at King's College in London, where I was able to do languages in the day and study in seminars, and in the evening go on the cabaret circuit, where I started as stand-up. I then went to the Edinburgh Festival, back to where I was born, and the festival fringe that had inspired me as a teenager. Started doing shows in the mid-'80s, the alternative cabaret circuit just flourishing around that time. Got my first break at the BBC in 85, went to Channel 4 in 92, had 20 lovely years there with Bird Fortune, doing satire about the Conservative government, and John Major, then Tony Blair. Stopped doing that 2010, all sorts of different projects in the meantime. Married, 2 children, Ava and Lila. Ava, school assistant, Lila, show jumper, doing her A-levels, and looking forward to the next challenge.
Rory Bremner, it's been such good fun. And as always, not just good fun, but informative, interesting. It's so good to get your views on the world. And it's just, it's been a huge pleasure. And the festival, I know, is hugely grateful to you for joining us. It means a lot. And it's so important, because these are difficult, straitened times. I think it's so important to continue to be able to, in some ways, serve audiences. So thank you to everyone as well for joining us. But most importantly, Rory,
thank you. I can't wait to be back in Harrogate, and there's so many cafes, so I have a cup of tea with you all individually, and or coffee with you all, and that would be a week very well spent. Can't wait to be back in Harrogate. Have a lovely festival.